There's a growing MAGA backlash to President Donald Trump's latest threat to Iran.
Aren't people teasing right now that Samantha Powers and Hillary Clinton must somehow have gotten invited to the Mar-a-Lago New Year's Eve celebration because the president coming out today saying, hey, we're locked and loaded? Isn't that straight from the Samantha Powers and Hillary Clinton playbook?
Steve Bannon used to be Trump's chief strategist, of course. He knows exactly how his old boss would feel about being compared to Hillary Clinton and Samantha Power. Those comments coming after Trump posted this just before 3 a.m. this morning, mind you, saying, quote, if Iran I think he meant shoots, and violently kills peaceful protesters, which is their custom, the United States of America will come to their rescue. We are locked and loaded and ready to go, end quote. Protests, we should note, are growing across Iran as inflation rises and the nation's currency plummets. So far, though, the president's words are just that, words. A White House official tells CNN that they are not aware of any actions taken or increases in troop levels in the region. But it's not just Bannon breaking with Trump when it comes to Iran. Soon-to-be former Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene tweeted, quote, President Trump threatening war and sending in troops to Iran is everything we voted against in 24. Trump voters spent the week threatening a tax revolt because they are so furious about the never-ending waste, fraud, and abuse of their hard-earned money going to foreigners and to foreign wars, end quote. So let's get off the sidelines, head into the arena. My panel is here. First, I do want to go straight to senior White House correspondent Kevin Liptak with his new reporting. Kevin, is there any military muscle behind the president's words?
At this point, what we've heard from officials is that no troops have been added to the region. Their preparation levels have not been changed. And what one White House official told us is that the president hasn't taken any action and that his words here were really meant as a strong warning. So it's not exactly clear what precisely has been locked and loaded, as the president puts it there. He's being kind of characteristically vague about what his intentions are. I do think when you talk to officials, they do sort of describe a hypothetical list of actions that the president could take that would stop short of firing missiles into Iran. For example, he could take a step akin to what President Biden took back in 2022, the last time protests flared up in Iran, which is to use American technology to bolster internet connectivity, to essentially allow some of these protesters to get around the regime's attempts to crack down on information. You hear potential talk about sanctions, on regime figures or on sectors like the banking or oil sectors. Of course, Iran already has loads of American sanctions on it, so it's unclear what effect those could have. The other hypothetical that you hear discussion of is potential cyber action, taking steps that would potentially target the regime on the cyber front. And of course, that's something that the U.S. has done before when it comes to Iran. I think at the end of the day, President Trump has demonstrated that he has a greater appetite for risk in Iran than some of his predecessors. Even acknowledging these protests and throwing his support behind the protesters is more than, for example, what President Obama did back in 2009 when protesters were flaring up in Iran. Obama not really saying anything, fearing that could potentially lead the regime to claim that the protesters were backed by the West. Obama later said that he regretted not doing and saying more there. But President Trump clearly showing quite a provocative streak. You remember it was just earlier this week when he said, standing alongside the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, that he would be willing to carry out further airstrikes in Iran if it's demonstrated that Tehran is rebuilding its nuclear program or its ballistic missile program. But there is a dilemma here. Of course, if he doesn't follow through on this threat, it could just embolden the regime and cause them to crack down on these protesters further. And you have seen regime figures are really going harshly after President Trump. The head of Iran's parliament said that American bases and forces across the entire region will be legitimate targets if the U.S. interferes in the country. And of course, we've seen them target American forces previously. Just back in June, they fired at the Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar. And so the president, quite provocative language, and I think it's something that the U.S. will be watching very carefully to see how all of this proceeds going forward.
No question, the risks are real. Kevin Liptak, thanks so much. My panel here with me, Tehran Moran. He is journalist, host of the Real Patriotism podcast. Sophia Tsai, White House reporter for Politico, plus Democratic strategist and CNN political correspondent Maria Cardona. Brian Lanza, former senior advisor to Donald Trump's 2024 campaign. And we're joined by David Sanger, CNN political and national security analyst, also with that newspaper called the New York Times. David, let me begin with you, because what Kevin mentioned there, given you and I have covered Iran for a long time, of the risk for the protesters of being tied to the U.S. government, that's a real risk, right? They don't want the impression that they are operating under the direction of Washington.
Well, there's a lot of history here, Jim, and no Iranian student gets through school without learning about the U.S. role in engineering a major coup in Iran in the 1950s, run by, among others, Kermit Roosevelt of the Teddy Roosevelt descendant. So the message that the president was sending, while I'm sure at 3 a.m. he probably wasn't really thinking about the 1950s history here, is one that plays right into the regime's hands, because they want to say, this isn't an organic protest. This isn't about our mismanagement of the economy and the entire country. It's all engineered by the United States again. And of course, when the president says he's locked and loaded, I mean, this is not like taking out nuclear sites. What exactly do you aim at if there are protests underway? The troops that are surrounding the protesters? Probably not. The regime itself? The president had that chance in his first term and he decided not to go do it, although he did kill a major military leader. But it's not clear what it is that the military could actually do here. Kevin mentioned that the Biden administration sent in basically internet in a box that would help connect the protesters. That's the kind of thing that would do the most good at this point.
Yeah, and by the way, they did that with consciousness that they did not want a U.S. stamp on that material because they didn't want that connection. Sophia, you cover the White House closely here, and to Kevin Liptak's point, this is not the first time that President Trump in the last 48 hours has mentioned military action against Iran. I want to play that. These are his comments, part of his comments next to the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu earlier. Have a listen.
I hear that Iran is trying to build up again, and if they are, we're going to have to knock them down. We'll knock them down. We'll knock the hell out of them.
Is there serious consideration, to your knowledge, in this administration about further military action?
I mean, he's done it recently. He's done it with the strikes on those nuclear sites. So, I mean, taking that into consideration, I think a lot of options are on the table. And no one really knows what Trump means by locked and loaded, but I think that's a part of the point. That's a part of his strategy of sort of keeping these other governments on the back foot, because he is unpredictable, he is brash, he is willing to go there at 3 a.m. while he's at Mar-a-Lago without a lot of aides besides him. Yeah,
and listen, I mean, exactly, a little madman theory in there. I mean, the trouble, Brian Lanz, I imagine, is the political risk within his own base, and you saw some of that, Marjorie Taylor Greene. Here's Representative Thomas Massie. He posted on X today a few issues with this. He says, we have problems at home, shouldn't be wasting military resources. Military strikes on Iran require congressional authorization, and the threat isn't about freedom of speech in Iran, it's about the dollar, oil, and Israel. How severe is that split in the party regarding military action, not just in Iran, but, I mean, Venezuela, you name it?
I think it'll get larger by the day, right? I mean, it's as soon as that tweet went out at 3 o'clock in the morning, I started getting calls from European friends, Middle East friends, 5 minutes later. Yeah. As soon as 6 a.m. hit, I started getting calls from my physical phone calls at 6 a.m. saying, hey, from people in D.C. saying, what's going on? There is a concern, right? President Trump has shown to be in this second term willing to engage in any issue that hits the headline or any issue that hits the newswire. Iran's one of them, Venezuela. And he's got to try to circle that with a base. The people I talk to certainly don't want any kinetic activity in Iran. They want to be supportive of the protesters. They wanted to have this organic push because ultimately